What happens if CISA 2015 isn't renewed? We'll talk about it on this episode of Safe Mode. Welcome to Safe Mode. I'm Greg Otto, editor-in-chief at Cyberscoop. Every week, we break down the most pressing security issues in technology, providing you the knowledge and the tools to stay ahead of the latest threats, while also taking you behind the scenes of the biggest stories in cybersecurity.
An attack is coming.
It's about keeping us safe.
He's just a disgruntled hacker.
She's a super hacker.
Stay alert.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.
This is Safe Mode. Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Mode. I am your host, Greg Otto. On this week's interview segment, we're going to be talking to Kevin Haynes, the CEO of Reveal Security, about securing machine identities. But first, talking with Tim Starks, who wrote a very interesting story last week about what is essentially the talk of the town in the cybersecurity policy space, talking about CISA 2015 and looking at what happens if it does not get renewed before the September 30th. Tim, it was a fascinating story that looked at the what ifs of this, and I'll toss it to you. What if?
Yeah, it's funny that you say talk of the town. I was at a cybersecurity conference where this was the big buzz, is no matter who was on stage, everybody was like, we got to renew 2015. Or people asking that, what's the latest gossip on what's going to happen with CISA 2015? Only second, perhaps, or actually, I would actually say second to when the buzz of Taylor and Travis.
Priorities, of course.
Squeals across the conference. But look, this is something that people think is a big deal. It might come across as a little wonky, but I think it's a little bit of a victim of its own success to a certain extent. The 2015 law, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Sharing Act, passed in 2015. It was a huge deal back then. 10 years we've been waiting for it to expire, and it's right around the corner. At the end of September, it's due to do so. The predictions range from pretty dire to just bad as far as what might actually happen. On the very severe end, people are saying we're going to see information sharing chopped down by 80 to 90%, between federal government and agencies, between companies in the federal government and among companies within their sectors. So that's the high end. The low end of what people expect to happen, regardless of whether they're people who are in industry, who of course benefit from some of these legal protections, is that this is going to shift a lot of the decision making about whether to share or not and how to share from the operators, the people who are in the field doing the day-to-day sharing, to the general counsel's office of companies, the legal department. And that's not the way it's been. When I say that it's a victim of its own success, in a way, what I mean is this was a very controversial legislation back in 2015, and now it's not. And it seems to be because it's worked out the way people had best hoped that it would. And it's taken cybersecurity information sharing a little bit off the table as a topic to even have to wrestle with. The fear is that we will now be going back to that pre-2015 mentality where now this is something we have to think about. How do we do it? Are we allowed to do it? In what circumstances are we allowed to do it? It complicates things at minimum is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and that figure, it's interesting that you have the 80 to 90%, and you hear that and you go, well, how do you really quantify that? And then people go, I don't know if it's going to be that much. It's going to be significant. Like if this does shut down, you're going to see some stuff really grind to the halt. Sand is going to be in the gears of, like you said, a piece of law that, while it was controversial when it was passed, has come to fruition and people are actually supportive of it, which is really kind of staggering thinking back to the conversations that were had in the lead up to this in 2015.
Yeah, there was a big debate back then where the privacy groups were really bent out of shape about this and really worried about what it would lead to. They're not saying they love it, but they're not making a fuss about it, frankly. Maybe they're busy with other things because there's a lot going on, or maybe it would be hard to point to a record saying, oh gosh, this really led to some privacy violations. All of the audits suggest that hasn't been the case.
So I'm wondering too, because there's a lot of things that are still being discussed as this gets closer to the renewal date. And one of them being, I know, the implications of the Supreme Court ruling with Chevron, which looks at kind of the way that the federal government uses its regulatory powers across the board. And I know this is something that you've talked to experts about, that Chevron and the ruling there does have some possible implications in what we see moving forward with CISA.
Yeah, that's the potential fear, is that if you look at what had been in place aside from CISA 2015 in terms of legal protections for information sharing, it was memos from agencies saying, we think you're legally cleared on this. And in addition to the fact that Chevron raises questions about the scope of non-explicitly authorized congressional actions to do regulation, that throws some of this in doubt. And then related point, but a little different, is that from a court standpoint, if Congress had a chance to authorize this again and opted against it, that might imply that quite opposite, that this is not something that a legal memo would be enough to say, yes, you can do this and it will be fine. If Congress didn't explicitly reauthorize it, maybe that means Congress explicitly considers this to be forbidden. So those are a couple of scenarios that seem that they could play into this if this doesn't come to fruition.
So there's another little wrinkle too that some experts talk to you about, particularly around the Trump administration and their AI action plan. Like, how does that factor into what we could see before the end of the month?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think part of why people are bringing this up is because those who want to see this reauthorized know that Trump and his people have a lot of sway with Republicans in Congress. They obviously control both the House and the Senate. And the more attention that the administration gives to this in terms of wanting to make it come to reality, that's good for the people who want to see this reauthorized. And because the administration has said, we want to create an AI ISAC, an information sharing analysis, information sharing and analysis center on AI. If you don't have this legal underpinning, the fear is that becomes less of a reality. So if you want to like squeeze the levers and try to get the administration to get on board with this, they say, hey, this AI ISAC thing you want to do? Well, it's going to be a little harder to do if you don't actually start exerting some pressure in Congress.
Right, which is really interesting because knowing the text of the AI action plan is they definitely wanted, like, obviously the growth of AI is the real big part of that, but they have, it's on paper. You can go read it on whitehouse.gov where security is part and parcel with making sure that AI grows at the rate that the Trump administration is trying to reach.
Yeah. But before I want to make sure that I get this in, we don't advocate for legislation here at Cyberscoop, right?
Right.
As a reporter, I would like to advocate for one thing. Can lawmakers change the name from CISA to something else? Because we have to keep talking about the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. This is something that actually has come up a lot where people are like, hey, if you can make some changes, could you just make it less confusing so that people understand we're talking about this and this? And
okay, in the short time that we have before it does get renewed, given that change could be made, what else does the timeline look like? Like, Washington works this way. We all know it's not just cybersecurity policy, it's policy across the board that things generally take the pressure of a deadline to actually see the light of day. And that's probably the way that we're heading with this, right? Maybe with a new name so we can differentiate it. As an editor, I would love something to help out with that. But we're probably going to see this get down to the deadline. But that being said, with the experts that you talk to, there's no real worry that this is going to lapse. And even if it does lapse, this isn't something that's just going to go by the wayside. Like, people are going to throw up their hands and go, well, that was the law of the land and now it's not.
Yeah, it kind of feels like people have their fingers crossed. They're optimistic that this isn't going to lapse. But what it's tied up with right now, it seems like, is the idea of a continuing resolution. And Congress has gone ahead and done continuing resolutions, even as they've kind of panicked and kind of thrown up their hands about how appropriations process works. They typically have continued to fund the government when there's a decision point. Not obviously every single time, but that's happened. And because the fiscal year ends at exactly the same time that this law would end, there is some hope that you can attach a short-term extension to the CR. And then that gives you a few more months, probably only a few more months though, of appropriators saying, we're not going to keep carrying your water on this. You need to get something done. We're going to take care of you through the end of this calendar year, say, but you need to get this done. So it gives them a little bit of leeway to do something to resolve any conflicts. And there are a couple conflicts that they'll have to resolve if they're just going beyond a straight 10-year reauthorization. There are some different views about how this should go based on what we've heard from Senator Paul in the Senate as the lead committee that will have some say over what happens with this. We don't have a clear picture yet on what the House wants to do, but they have talked about making some changes. So if they want to make any substantial changes, it's probably going to happen after the short-term reauthorization. But even then, that's still a really tight window. So there is a feasible scenario where this does fall away for a little while that may be out of its power. It's related to congressional schedule and congressional politics. And then there's a part of it that might fall away just because differing visions, very short timelines.
I was going to say, to wrap it up, we have 30 days and change to see some changes here, but maybe not. Maybe even the road beyond just a short-term reauthorization means that further changes could be coming. Whatever the timeline is, I know that you'll be all over it, and I know that we will be informing our readers of all the changes as they come. So, Tim, really appreciate you hopping aboard.
Thank you.
Okay, now to our interview segment where we are talking with Kevin Haynes, the CEO of Reveal Security, and talking about securing machine identities. Credentials are such a big part of the attack chain, especially with cyber criminals really looking to get those credentials to make their lives easier when they're trying to steal data or cause a ransomware attack. And while sometimes we automatically think of those credentials being tied to human identities, there are machine identities as well, where companies will set up automated accounts that take care of all different types of enterprise things inside an IT system. And attackers know that, and attackers go after them. So as much as we secure human identities, we need to secure machine identities. A good case of this is a story that we ran this week on Microsoft Group Storm 0501 that is looking to really ramp up ransomware in the cloud, and they do so by targeting machine identities. So I talked to Kevin while we were out at Black Hat, really talked about the need to secure machine identities. Great conversation. Check it out. All right, joining us on this week's interview segment for Safe Mode is Kevin Haynes, CEO of Reveal Security, talking about machine identities here at Black Hat 2025. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Greg.
So when it comes to identity management and access management, I feel like so many of the sources that I talk to are really just all focused on the human part of it, when really I know that there's some stats out there that there are like 8 machine identities for every 1 human identity inside an enterprise. So why do so many organizations really focus on the human side without really focusing on the fact that the machines are often the ones that can hold credentials to the most sensitive and privileged information inside an enterprise?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, identity's been around a long time, right?
Of course.
And sort of back in the day, that's how we thought about things, right? That's how things grow up, and that's how you sort of set the frame of it. I hear the same stats that you hear, about the numbers and things like that. I think I do feel like this is something that people are looking up to with statistics like that and more education around for the non-human part of this. But I still think that there's, to me, an identity is an identity, right? And we need to be thinking about identities that are human, not human, and hopefully managing that seamlessly versus sort of, I really, you hate to see us try to do that in 2 different ways with 2 different, methodologies, bunch of different tools. That sounds like more pain than what I want to see.
Okay. So in your eyes, what are some of the most effective techniques or tooling that can help maintain like accurate real-time inventories of machine security? Because obviously that needs to be a part of managing identity too. So I'm wondering, in your eyes, what can be done to really get arms around the machine identities?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different approaches and products out there that will help you ensure that what I'll kind of call the access process, of giving the identity access. And, you can be, depending on your program and, how long you've had it and your maturity, how much how discrete can you get those controls, and how much can you get sort of the posture management piece of this really dialed in. I think all that's really important. Sort of where I come from on this, it really is about hygiene, and posture management is important, but it's not sufficient. Like, really looking beyond just the sort of the posture piece of this is actually how identities are behaving, because oftentimes, like in a lot of things in this world, you sort of think certain things are set up to work a certain way. And there's all kinds of exceptions that are given over time, and all kinds of little things where they were partly deployed, but not fully. And so you have to not just look at the posture, but actually look at what's actually happening in terms of the trust or not trust the identity.
So how's the introduction of large-scale AI or like autonomous workloads change the requirements or best practices for managing these identities?
I don't know that it really has changed it, other than to say that it's exacerbated it, right? it's brought it more into light. Maybe it wasn't quite as big of a something, something we had to think about or defend against in the past. And now it's sort of, you can't not think about this now. So for me, it's, in terms of how you go do it, maybe not tons of change, but in terms of the awareness of it and the size of the, call it the attack surface, you can call it that, is definitely increased.
So even as enterprises are developing the AI agent, still just really focusing on that posture management, no matter what the technology is.
Well, I wouldn't, again, I wouldn't just focus on posture management, because I think that's going to be a big mistake.
Okay.
I just, because, how many times do we think something works a certain way only to find out that it didn't work the way we thought it did?
Okay.
And we find that out usually because something got breached. Right. And then you find, okay, well, there was something there was some exception, or there was something that, okay, it didn't get fully deployed because of these 10 reasons, or maybe it got deployed here, but only partially deployed there, or we acquired something and didn't roll it out, or whatever. Right. So like relying on posture management's not where you want to be. You really want to be looking at, you want to do that, right? That's a good basic, but then you need to go beyond that to actually monitor what the identities are actually doing. And that'll also tell you a lot about posture.
So talk to me about monitoring that. What are the best metrics or the KPIs that can provide the best insight into the strength of an organization's machine identity controls?
Well, I'd start with, do you have basically some controls, right? Do you have controls? What are they?
Okay.
Right. Cause that for many, I think that's a starting point. And from there, I would say move that up to, can I have a reasonable set of controls for, access. So providing an initial access and, a reasonable set of role-based access controls that I can sort of enumerate or talk about or demonstrate. And then beyond that, it's what can I actually do or see about behaviors after these identities have the token, right? So imagine I've got single, something that I've given single sign-on, I've given the token. Now, what is my ability to monitor that post authentication? And I think from there, you would want a complete set of metrics. I think we're early innings for that. I think we're early days. I think a lot of this has been focused on the initial access. And part of the whole zero trust, idea is that, you're not trusting, you're not just trusting, but you're verifying, after that. So I think the metrics are going to have to include the access piece, but also beyond access.
I was going to ask you zero trust wise, what does the zero trust model look like when applied to machine identities? And where do you see that organizations are still falling short, especially with like least privilege, because that's an important part of the zero trust model.
I think we have to start with, you want to do these things, but back to my point, there's a lot of reasons why certain things won't happen the way you think they do. Right. So zero trust is about understanding that that's reality. That's the reality we live in. We have to defend in an imperfect world with imperfect visibility, imperfect policies, practices, and adherence to that. So I think it is basically, you have to be able to verify that behavior on an ongoing basis, not just at the time of authentication. So that's how I think about it.
So at the time of authentication, that's a really interesting question, because how do you do that, especially when there's like an explosion of like short-lived credentials? If we're talking about like microservices or ephemeral cloud workloads, mouthful there, especially that is such a short time frame.
Yes.
That how do you do that to be able to do it effectively in real time?
Well, it's a problem, right? So it makes it much harder. So I think the basics are still there, which is, do you have a process for the initial access, and how can you sort of have posture management around that, but also behavior monitoring around that? And then once that token is given, for however short, what's your ability to actually determine what that identity is doing? And is it something that you want happening or not?
So especially on the cloud part of it too, I mean, are there specific operational challenges that you see or that may arise when securing machine identities within the cloud native space?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes. But it's just back to what we just said. I mean, I don't think there's anything special about that. If you're thinking about SaaS and cloud, anything that's going to have the abilities to authenticate, you're going to have exposed to the internet. Yes, you need to be able to have the access process, but also the follow-on monitoring of what happens after.
So I'm going to go out even further than just the AI part.
Yeah.
On the quantum side of things, what first steps should an enterprise take to assess and begin mitigating the impact of quantum on their, machine identity frameworks?
Well, I think it starts with how far away do we think that is? I mean, what is feasible for an organization to take on right now?
Okay.
Right. I mean,
yeah, you're talking to the best of the best right there. The lion's share are probably not thinking about this problem right now.
Think about what's going to be their ability to sort of influence something or change something. I think what I would say for your average organization is just stay abreast of it, right? I don't know what you're hearing in terms of the timelines for, when that's going to really show up as a problem. But it's probably,
I feel like sorry to interject there. No, on the timelines, I feel like it's going to be a future problem until it's not. That's generally the way that things work here, where it's like, oh, that's not something I need to worry about. And then it comes and everybody goes, oh, I need to worry about this right now.
100%. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a nation state that pops up with, okay, here it is. Right. And then it's a mad scramble. But I think that's a big problem for the world.
So looking ahead, what different trends or different technological shifts besides what we just talked about? What are we not, to what I just said right there? What can we worry about right now instead of worrying about it when it's too late, especially with regard to machine identities?
I think it goes back to the basics of what I'll say is you can't defend what you can't see, right? And you can't, manage what you can't defend what you can't manage. And so I think it goes back to basics of, okay, what is the process by which we're going to standardize on how we manage identities? So I talk to a lot of organizations and they still don't have, they're still dealing with multiple sort of systems, right?
Right.
For doing that. And so can you get down to a standard way, a basic, standard approach to doing that that's consolidated for the enterprise that you feel has solid controls in it, right? And then from there, I think it's, can you actually spot things that are, I'll call it sort of the anomalous or things beyond just the rule IOC driven or rule driven type things. And then once you're doing that well, then can you actually really start to see what's happening post authentication and take action on things that would be presenting risk to the organization after they've already authenticated. And that's true of whether it's a human or non-human, and it's true of whether it's a negligent type thing that's happening or an insider, just taking it, or somebody has taken over the credentials from the outside. I think it's true in all those cases.
Right. I guess we've seen a lot of breaches that have focused on machine identities too. So I'm wondering if you've seen what you're talking about really resonate when you talk to customers that are worried about protecting their machine identities.
Yeah. I don't, when I talk to customers, they are hearing the sort of the urgency around the explosion of non-human identities. So it's kind of got their attention. But when I talk to them, they don't want to think about it as, okay, what am I going to do distinctly different for this problem than my human problem?
Okay.
Because again, you think about most of these organizations are stretched already.
Yes.
Right. They're not getting 30 more people to come help them with non-human identities. And so they need to manage this in a seamless way. So what I hear is okay, I'm interested in hearing about, or I'm worried about this non-human problem and the potential there, but I don't want to manage that in a way that's different than what I'm managing all the other stuff. So tell me, Kevin, about how you can make that work seamless.
Great.
That's what I hear.
Great. Kevin, really appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Black Hat.
Thank you so much, Greg. Likewise.
Thanks for listening to Safe Mode, a weekly podcast on cybersecurity and digital privacy brought to you by Cyberscoop. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and a review and share it with your friends, your coworkers, your CISOs, your sysadmins, your mom, your dad, anybody that wants to know more about cybersecurity. To find out more information or to contact me, please look for all of our social media handles or visit cyberscoop.com. Thanks for listening. Check us out next week.